Django stood at the edge of the massive arena, feeling both excitement and nerves. The crowd's roar filled the air as the alien warriors from across the galaxy cheered for their champions. Django, however, was not like them. He was human. He was different, and he was about to face something no human had ever dared to challenge before, the alien queen. He held his sword tightly, a weapon passed down through generations of his family. It wasn't the sharpest, nor the most advanced. It was just a simple blade, forged by his ancestors. It wasn't made for show, like the fancy weapons of the alien warriors. No, this sword was a symbol of human resilience. It had been used to defend, to protect, and now it would be used to fight for honor. The alien queen, a towering figure of beauty and power, stood in the center of the arena. She was tall, her armor glowing with strange symbols, and her eyes, glowing with an eerie light, looked down at Django with amusement. She had heard the rumors of a human warrior who had entered this tournament to face her. At first, she thought it was a joke. "Are you the one who challenges me?" The alien queen's voice echoed through the arena, sounding more like a hiss than a question. Her voice was cold and filled with arrogance. Django took a deep breath, stepping forward, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment. This was the challenge he had been waiting for, the moment to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. "Yes," Django said simply, his voice steady. "I am here to prove that humans can fight just as fiercely as any of you." The queen's lips curled into a mocking smile. A human with that thing. She looked at Django's sword, as though it were the most ridiculous thing she had ever seen. "You think this ancient, outdated weapon will be enough to defeat me? I could snap you in half with a mere flick of my finger." The crowd laughed, a wave of mocking amusement rippling through the stands. The queen had defeated countless champions, her blades stronger and faster than anything they could offer. She had never lost a battle, and she had no reason to think this human would be any different. But Django didn't flinch. His grip tightened on his sword, his eyes never leaving the queen's. The laughter of the crowd, the queen's mocking words, they didn't matter. What mattered was the fight ahead. He had trained for years for this moment, learning the ancient techniques of human swordsmanship. The sword may have seemed simple, but it was powerful in its own way. The human spirit, with its creativity and determination, could overcome any odds. The queen raised her weapon, a sleek, glowing blade of alien design, and motioned for the fight to begin. Her eyes gleamed with confidence as she waited for Django to make the first move. She had no doubt that this would be over quickly. Django stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest, but his mind clear. It wasn't just about winning. It was about showing the galaxy that humans had something more valuable than weapons or technology, something they could never mock. The will to never give up. The sound of the horn echoed through the arena, signaling the beginning of the battle. Django's heart raced in his chest, but his mind stayed focused. He had trained for years, and this was the moment to prove that a human could face an alien queen. The alien queen wasted no time. With a flick of her wrist, she swung her glowing blade toward Django. The sword moved like lightning, too fast for the human eyes to follow. But Django had no intention of standing still. He stepped back just in time, narrowly avoiding the queen's first strike. The queen smiled. "You're quick, human, but not quick enough." Django didn't respond. He had no time for words. His sword was all he needed. His grip tightened, and he took a step forward, preparing to face her head-on. He knew this was not going to be easy, but he had no choice. There was no turning back. She came at him again, faster this time. Her blade swung through the air, cutting through the wind like a deadly beam of light. Django moved again, his sword raised, ready to block. A clash of their blades rang out across the arena as the two weapons met. The queen's sword was lighter and faster, but Django's strength and determination kept him steady. "You think your little sword can stop me?" The queen laughed. "This is nothing but a toy." Django's face remained calm, though inside, the words stung. But he knew better than to show his emotions. He couldn't afford to let her mock him. Not now. He had to focus. The queen took a few steps back, analyzing her opponent. She had fought many warriors, each one more powerful than the last, but none had ever dared to face her with such confidence. And this human, this little creature with his tiny sword, was different. He wasn't backing down, and that made her curious. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with mockery, "I expected more from you. I've seen the strength of your kind, but you're disappointing. All that talk about humanity's spirit and will, but it's nothing against the power of my blade." She lunged again, her sword cutting through the air. Django barely had time to react, but his sword intercepted hers. The shock of the clash rattled his arms, but he held firm. He wasn't going to let her win. Not like this. The queen stepped back, her eyes narrowing. "You're strong for a human," she said, "but strength alone won't save you. You need more than just willpower to defeat me." Django didn't speak. He knew what the queen didn't understand. It wasn't about strength or fancy weapons. It was about the fight, the heart, and the drive to keep going no matter what. The queen could mock his sword all she wanted, but she couldn't mock the will of humanity. As they continued to circle each other, the queen's expression changed slightly. She had underestimated Django. But now she was beginning to realize that this battle wouldn't be as easy as she thought. The battle between Django and the alien queen raged on in the arena. The air was thick with tension, and every eye in the crowd was focused on the fight unfolding below. Django's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his mind sharp. The queen was fast, and her blade was unlike anything he had ever seen. But Django wasn't backing down. He had come too far to lose now. The queen's glowing sword flashed in the sunlight as she lunged at him again, her movements like liquid grace. Django barely had time to raise his sword to block. The clash of their weapons sounded like thunder echoing through the arena. Django's arms shook with the force of the impact, but he held his ground. The queen laughed, her voice rich with amusement. "Still standing, human. I'm impressed. But it won't be enough." Django said nothing. He couldn't afford to be distracted. He focused on the queen's movements, watching for any sign of weakness. She was fast, but every fighter had a pattern, a rhythm. And Django was determined to find it. The queen stepped back, eyes narrowing as she observed him closely. She had expected this to be an easy fight, but the human was proving more challenging than she thought. He was not only fast but also clever, using his sword in ways she had not anticipated. She had underestimated him, but she wouldn't make that mistake again. "You fight well for a human," she admitted, though the words came out grudgingly. "But it's still not enough. You cannot defeat me." Django could feel the sting of her words, but he didn't let them distract him. He had heard worse in his life, and it had never stopped him before. He stepped forward, bringing his sword up in a sweeping motion. The queen's eyes widened for just a moment, caught off guard by his sudden move. Without thinking, Django took his chance. His blade cut through the air, aiming for the queen's exposed side. The queen barely managed to bring her sword up to block, but it was too late. Django's sword grazed her armor, leaving a small but deep scratch across its surface. The queen's eyes flashed with surprise, her jaw tightening as she felt the sharpness of the human strike. She had never been hit before, and for a moment, she was speechless. But then, her laughter echoed once more, though it sounded less certain this time. "So, you're not just all talk," she said, her voice a mixture of respect and disbelief. "It seems I've underestimated you, human, but don't think one lucky strike will save you." Django didn't let her words distract him. He could feel the weight of his sword in his hand, the power behind each swing. It wasn't just the blade that made him strong. It was the spirit behind it. He wasn't just fighting for victory. He was fighting for the pride of humanity, for every person who had ever been told they weren't strong enough. The queen's mocking smile faded slightly as she took a step back, eyeing him more carefully now. Django had landed his first strike, and that small victory was enough to change the mood of the battle. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time, it felt like Django had a chance. Django's sword had struck the queen's armor, a victory that was enough to make her pause, but not for long. The alien queen's glowing eyes narrowed, her expression turning cold as her laughter faded away. She was no longer amused. The human before her had shown a glimpse of skill, and she did not like it. The crowd watched in silence as the queen stood still for a moment, assessing the situation. Her arrogance had been shaken, but her pride remained. She was the queen, undefeated and unchallenged. She could not allow a human to make a fool of her. "You've made a mistake," the queen said, her voice icy and full of venom. She raised her sword high, and the light from her blade seemed to intensify, casting a bright glow across the arena. Without warning, she lunged at Django again, but this time, the speed of her movements was terrifying. The queen was no longer holding back. Her blade was a blur as it cut through the air, aiming for Django with ruthless precision. Django barely had time to react. The queen's strikes were relentless, one after another, pushing him back. Her movements were graceful, yet deadly, and he struggled to keep up. Each blow she landed forced him to take a step back, and his arms began to grow heavy from the constant blocking. "You can't keep up," the queen sneered. "Your strength may be admirable, but it's not enough to match my power. I am a queen, and you're nothing but an insect to me." Django gritted his teeth as he dodged another of her strikes. Her words stung, but he couldn't let them distract him. He had to focus. He couldn't let the queen break his resolve. With every ounce of energy, he pushed himself forward, blocking her strikes and trying to find an opening. But the queen's fury only grew. She could see the sweat on Django's brow, the fatigue in his movements, and she knew she was close to victory. She was enjoying this now, savoring the moment when she would crush the human spirit and prove once again that no one could challenge her. "You think your sword can stand against me?" she hissed, delivering a vicious blow that knocked Django's sword out of his hand. The weapon flew from his grip, landing several feet away on the ground. For a moment, everything went silent. Django stood there, breathless, his heart pounding. His sword was gone. The queen's blade hovered just inches from his chest. It would be over in an instant. He had failed. But Django refused to give up. His eyes locked onto the queen's, and in that moment, he remembered something important. His fight wasn't just about the sword. It was about who he was. And no matter how hard things got, he would never surrender. With a burst of energy, Django dove to the ground, rolling to where his sword had fallen. The queen's blade missed him by inches, and she let out a frustrated growl. Django quickly grabbed his sword and raised it once more, ready to fight. "Not yet," he muttered under his breath. "This fight is far from over." The battle between Django and the alien queen continued to unfold with fierce intensity. The crowd was on edge, unable to look away. It was clear that this fight was no ordinary contest. It was a battle of pride, determination, and raw willpower. Django had already surprised the queen once, landing a strike on her armor, but now, as she stood over him, her glowing blade hovering just inches from his chest, it seemed like all hope was lost. But Django wasn't about to give up. His hands shook with exhaustion, but he refused to let his fear control him. He tightened his grip on his sword, steadying himself for whatever the queen might throw at him next. The queen stepped back slightly, her lips curling into a smile. "You are a stubborn human," she said, her voice filled with a mix of admiration and annoyance. "But I won't let you waste my time any longer." With a sudden burst of speed, she lunged at him again, her blade flashing through the air. Django barely managed to block the attack, the force of her strike sending a shock through his arms. He staggered backward, barely keeping his footing. The queen's relentless assault showed no signs of slowing down. But then something inside Django clicked. He had been fighting with all his strength, but he hadn't been using his mind. The queen was powerful, But she was also predictable. Every fighter had patterns, and he had seen hers. He had been focused only on defense, waiting for her to strike again. But now he realized he had to act. As the queen lunged once more, Django stepped aside, narrowly avoiding the blow. Instead of retreating, he spun around, using the momentum of her attack against her. In one smooth motion, he struck with all his might. His sword collided with her blade, but it wasn't just a block this time. Django used his full strength to push her sword away, creating an opening. The queen's eyes widened in shock as Django's blade sliced through the air, aiming for her unguarded side. He had caught her off guard. The edge of his sword scraped across her armor, leaving a deep scratch that shimmered in the sunlight. For a brief moment, the queen faltered. It was small, but it was enough. She took a step back, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. She had underestimated him again. You landed another hit," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. Impossible. Django's heart pounded in his chest, but he wasn't about to stop now. He had taken the queen by surprise once, and he could do it again. He could see the doubt in her eyes, a crack in her confidence. It was more than enough to fuel his determination. The queen stood tall, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her gaze. For the first time in this battle, she was unsure. Django had proven that a human could stand toe-to-toe with her, and that alone had shaken her to her core. "You may have landed a lucky strike," the queen sneered, though the edge of her voice betrayed her nervousness. "But luck won't save you." Django raised his sword again, his grip steady. He was no longer just fighting for survival. He was fighting for respect, for humanity, and for every person who had ever been told they were not good enough. "It's not about luck," Django said, his voice strong. "It's about heart." The queen's eyes flickered with anger as she stared at Django. He had struck her again, and for the first time in this fight, she wasn't sure of her victory. The hum of her glowing sword filled the air, but it no longer felt as powerful as it had when the battle first began. There was doubt now, a crack in her confidence that she couldn't ignore. Django, on the other hand, felt his heart race, but his resolve was stronger than ever. He knew that this was the turning point. The queen might be powerful, but he had proven that humans could stand strong. The sword in his hands wasn't just metal. It was a symbol of humanity's strength, creativity, and resilience. The queen took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving Django's. She had to end this now. With a swift motion, she raised her sword high above her head, and in the blink of an eye, she charged at him once more. This time, she was faster, more precise. Her strikes were like lightning, coming from all directions, and Django had little time to react. He blocked her first strike, but the force of the blow sent him staggering. She was too quick, too powerful. He barely had time to steady himself before she came at him again. Her sword slashed through the air like a beam of light, and he barely managed to raise his sword in time to block. "Is this all you have?" The queen taunted, her voice dripping with mockery. "Your sword is nothing compared to my strength. You are outmatched, human." Django gritted his teeth, feeling the weight of her words. The queen was right. His sword was not as powerful as hers, but he couldn't give up. He had to keep fighting, not just for himself, but for humanity. He sidestepped another of her powerful strikes, his legs aching from the effort. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he forced himself to focus. He needed to find a way to outsmart her, to use her overconfidence against her. There had to be a way to turn this fight in his favor. Then it happened. As the queen lunged forward again, Django noticed something, a small crack in her armor, just beneath her left shoulder. It was barely noticeable, but to him, it was a golden opportunity. He took a deep breath, preparing himself for the most dangerous move of the battle. With a sudden burst of speed, Django spun around, using his sword to deflect the queen's strike and creating an opening. He didn't hesitate. He aimed for the weak spot he had seen in her armor, putting everything he had into the attack. The queen's eyes widened in shock as Django's sword connected with her armor, striking the weak point. She staggered back, her sword dropping slightly as she tried to regain her balance. The crowd gasped, stunned by the human's unexpected move. For a moment, everything was still. The queen stood there, her armor now scratched and damaged, while Django remained ready, his sword raised in defense. The battle had changed. The queen was no longer the predator. She was the one who had been hurt. You found my weakness," the queen whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Django said nothing. He simply raised his sword again, ready to continue the fight. He had done it. He had found a way to win. And now, he wasn't backing down. The battle had shifted. The queen's flawless confidence was now cracked, and the audience could feel the change in the air. Django, still breathing heavily, stood his ground, sword raised, eyes locked on the alien queen. For the first time, she seemed unsure. She took a step back, her eyes studying him with a mixture of disbelief and respect. "You've wounded me," she said, her voice tight with restrained fury. "But that was just a lucky strike. You can't win this battle, human." Django didn't respond. His sword was still raised, his grip firm. He had no time for words. He had already proven something far more important, humanity's will to fight. His heart was pounding, his muscles aching, but the fire inside him burned brighter than ever. He had come too far to back down now. The queen's sword pulsed with energy, its glow brighter than before. Her expression hardened. She was done playing games. Her pride had been injured, and now she was determined to finish this once and for all. With a powerful roar, she charged at Django again, faster than ever before. Her blade moved in a blur of light, cutting through the air with deadly precision. Django barely had time to react. He raised his sword just in time to block her first strike, the force of it sending a jolt of pain up his arms. He staggered back, but he didn't fall. He kept his footing. Despite the queen's overwhelming strength, she came at him again, her blade flashing like a star. This time, Django couldn't fully block the attack. He felt the edge of the queen's sword graze his side, a sharp pain that made him wince. His body was tired, and his wounds were starting to catch up with him. The queen laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the arena. "Is this the best you can do, human? You're slowing down. I can taste your fear." But Django's spirit was not broken. He took a deep breath, pushing through the pain. He had to keep going. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every human who had ever been underestimated. He was fighting to show the galaxy that humanity's strength wasn't in its weapons or technology, but in its heart. As the queen lunged once again, Django did something unexpected. Instead of blocking, he ducked and rolled to the side, using his speed and agility to avoid the queen's strike. It was a risky move, but it worked. The queen's sword missed, and she stumbled forward, slightly off balance. Django saw his chance. Without hesitation, he sprang to his feet and moved in. He wasn't just aiming for her armor this time. He was aiming for her. He attacked with all his strength, his sword flashing as it connected with the queen's exposed side. This time, the blow was stronger. The queen staggered back, her hand pressed against the spot where Django had struck. Her eyes widened in shock, and for the first time in this battle, she looked uncertain. You're not supposed to be this strong," she muttered, more to herself than to Django. Django stood tall, his chest heaving, but his eyes were clear. "Humans don't give up," he said quietly. "And we don't back down." The queen, now visibly shaken, stared at him for a long moment. She had underestimated this human. The fight was far from over, but Django had done something she hadn't expected. He had made her question everything she thought she knew about strength. The battle had reached its climax. Django's chest heaved with every breath, sweat trickling down his face. His arms ached from blocking the queen's powerful strikes, and his side burned from the cut she had landed earlier. But he stood tall, refusing to show weakness. He had come this far, and he wouldn't give up now. The alien queen, once filled with arrogance, now looked at him with something different in her eyes. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was respect. She had underestimated this human, and that had been her mistake. Her glowing blade pulsed with a strange energy, and her expression grew darker. She was determined to finish this, but now something had shifted. "You've proven you're stronger than I thought," the queen said, her voice cold but oddly impressed. "But that won't save you." Django didn't speak. There was no need for words anymore. His sword was steady in his hands, his eyes locked onto the queen as she prepared for another strike. The crowd watched in silence, waiting to see if the human could pull off the impossible. The queen lunged at him with all her might, her blade flashing through the air like a comet. The sheer power of her attacks sent shockwaves through the arena, and Django had to move quickly to avoid being overwhelmed. He sidestepped, just barely escaping the queen's blade as it sliced through the air. He could feel the heat of her sword as it passed just inches from him, but he didn't hesitate. In that split second, he saw the opening. The queen had overextended her strike, leaving her left side exposed. He could not afford to waste this chance. Django acted instantly. He lunged forward, his sword raised high, and with all the strength he had left, he brought it down toward her. The queen's eyes widened in shock as she realized too late that she had left herself open. Django's blade struck her armor with a loud clash, and this time the force of the blow pushed through. The queen staggered back, her glowing blade flickering as she tried to regain her balance. She raised her hand to her side, where Django had struck, and her fingers brushed against the deep cut in her armor. The blood of the queen, strange and dark, stained her fingers as she stared at Django with disbelief. She looked at him, not with hatred, but with something far more powerful, respect. You did it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Django stood still, panting and exhausted, his sword still raised. The arena was dead silent. For the first time in this fight, the queen was the one who was stunned. "You've shown me something," the queen said, her voice soft now, no longer mocking. "Perhaps I was wrong. Humans, you are not like the others." The crowd, still in shock from the unexpected turn of events, began to cheer, but Django couldn't hear them. He was focused only on the queen, watching as her pride crumbled. The queen took a final step back, her shoulders sagging. She knew it was over. She had underestimated a human, and now the battle was lost. "I surrender," the queen said, her voice laced with reluctant respect. "You have proven your strength, human. I yield." Django lowered his sword, his body still trembling from exhaustion, but his heart was strong. He had done it. He had shown that no matter how powerful an enemy seemed, humanity's will could overcome anything. The crowd was still in shock. The battle that had begun as a brutal contest of power and pride had ended with the unexpected surrender of the alien queen. Django stood in the center of the arena, his chest heaving with each breath, sweat dripping down his face. His sword was still in his hand, but it felt heavy now, as if the weight of the battle had finally caught up to him. The queen, once so full of confidence and arrogance, now stood before him, her glowing blade lowered. She was breathing heavily, her armor dented and scratched from the fight. A thin line of blood trickled from the wound where Django had struck her. She looked at him, not with anger or hatred, but with something far more surprising: respect. Django was too tired to feel proud. His body ached, his muscles burning from the effort of the fight. But there was a strange calmness in him. He had done it. He had stood against a being that was far stronger and more powerful than any human could imagine. And he had won. The queen's voice broke the silence, her words soft but full of weight. You truly are different from the others." Her eyes locked onto Django's, and for the first time, there was no mocking, no scorn. "I did not expect this. You have proven your strength in a way no one ever has before." Django didn't know what to say. He had expected to hear more of her usual arrogance, more taunts, but instead there was a quiet humility in her voice. It wasn't the queen who had won. It was him. It was the human who had fought with everything he had, who had never given up, even when the odds were impossible. You fought with courage, the queen continued, her voice steady now. And that is something I respect. She took a step back, her shoulders straight, the weight of her defeat sinking in. You have proven that not even the greatest warriors in the galaxy can defeat a human with enough will. The crowd began to cheer, their voices rising like a wave. The alien queen, for the first time in her life, was defeated, not by her enemies, but by a single human who had dared to challenge her. It was a victory for all of humanity. Django raised his sword in a simple salute, acknowledging the queen's words. "It's not just about the fight," he said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "It's about never giving up. That's what makes humans strong." The queen nodded slowly, her eyes still on him. "You are right. I have learned that today." As Django lowered his sword and the cheers of the crowd filled the air, he realized something important. This battle, this moment, it wasn't just about proving himself. It was about proving to the galaxy that humans were a force to be reckoned with, that no matter what the odds were, no matter how impossible the challenge seemed, humanity would rise to meet it. And in that moment, Django knew that he had not only earned the respect of the queen, but the respect of everyone who had witnessed this incredible fight. The arena was alive with energy, the air thick with excitement as the crowd's cheers rang out. Django stood in the center, still holding his sword, though it felt heavier now with the weight of the battle behind him. His body ached, but his heart was full of pride. He had done it. Against all odds, he had defeated the alien queen. Around him, the crowd was still roaring in disbelief. They had come to witness a show, a one-sided victory for the queen. But what they had seen instead was the strength of a single human. Django, against the odds, had made the impossible possible. The queen, still standing before him, looked different now. Her arrogance had melted away, replaced by something more profound: respect. She had never expected this. She had underestimated the human spirit, and now she was forced to acknowledge its power. "You truly are a force to be reckoned with," the queen said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that Django had never heard before. "I've never faced anything like you. Your strength is not in your weapons, but in your will." Django nodded slowly, his grip on the sword loosening as the adrenaline began to fade. His heart was still racing, but he could feel the tension leaving his body. He had stood his ground, and it had paid off. "Humans don't rely on weapons alone," he said, his voice firm. "We rely on our hearts, our minds, and the strength to never give up." The queen's gaze softened as she studied him. Her once icy eyes were now filled with a mixture of admiration and understanding. The queen had known victory her entire life, but she had never experienced the kind of fight Django had just shown her. For the first time, she saw humanity as more than just a species to be conquered. "Perhaps I've misjudged you all," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Perhaps there is more to humanity than I ever imagined." The crowd grew silent as the queen stepped back. She lowered her sword, a gesture of peace and acknowledgement. The fight was over, and Django had won, not just the battle, but the queen's respect and the respect of everyone watching. Django lowered his sword as well, his muscles sore but his spirit soaring. He had come here as a challenger, a human fighting against the odds. But now he had become something more. He had become a symbol of humanity's strength, resilience, and unbreakable will. The queen turned toward the crowd, her voice ringing out for all to hear. "This human has shown me what true strength is. I yield. The battle is his." A cheer erupted from the audience, louder than anything they had ever heard before. The sound of it was overwhelming, and Django's heart swelled with pride. He had done what no one thought possible. He had fought and won, not just for himself, but for humanity. The queen looked back at Django, her eyes now filled with respect. I have learned much from you, human. Perhaps we will meet again, but next time. As equals. Django nodded, the smile on his face wide and proud. Next time, we'll see who's stronger. And with that, the arena erupted in applause, the cheers for the human who had defeated the unbeatable alien queen, proving once and for all that humanity was a force that would never back down.